talking about Morris and Company, A Family Affair, looking at William Morris and how he was influenced by family and co-workers to create an atmosphere that all people could work in the shops, and why they chose the themes that they did for their wallpapers and other marketing pieces. So first we're going to start with William Morris. He was born in Waltheimstyle, East London in 1834. His father was a partner at a broker firm that allowed Morris to have a privileged childhood as well as an inheritance large enough to mean that he would never need to earn an income. Morris developed an early attraction with landscape, buildings, and historical romance as he spent time exploring local parks, forests, and churches. Morris once said that when discussing whether the love of beauty was natural or acquired, that, quote, his own love of beauty must have been inborn, since neither his father nor his mother nor any of his relations had the least idea of it, end quote. And an instance of that was on a family trip to London in 1851, when Morris was then just 18 or 17 years old. He demonstrated his loyalty to craft principles, which rejected the standards of design and manufacturing at the time, by refusing to enter the Crystal Palace to see the great expedition, which championed machine-age design on the grounds of taste. After school, Morris went to Oxford University to study for the church. It was there that he met Edward Burne-Jones, who was to become one of the era's most famous painters and Morris's lifelong friend. Burne-Jones introduced him to a group of students who became known as the Set, or the Brotherhood, and who enjoyed romantic stories of medieval chivalry and self-sacrifice. Belonging to this group gave Morris an awareness of the deep divisions in contemporary society and sparked his interest in trying to create an alternative to the dehumanization industrial systems that produce poor quality, unnatural objects. In 1855, Morris and Burne-Jones went on an architectural tour of northern France that made both men realize that they were more committed to art than the church. After earning his degree, Morris began an apprenticeship with George Edmund Street, the era's leading neo-Gothic architect. His apprentice focused on architectural drawing and was supervised by the young architect Philip Webb, who would also become a close friend to Morris. Morris left Street's office after only 8 months and set a career path to be an artist. With the help of Burne-Jones' connection with the artist Dante Gabriel Rossetti, a central figure in the pre-Raphaelite group, his artistic career began. Morris joined Rossetti as a team of people that would paint murals in Oxford Union. And from the slide here, the paintings depict the Arthurian legends of the search of the Holy Grail. And he did those 1857 to 1859. Now, while working in Oxford, Morris met Jane Burden, a young woman from a poor working class background. The rules of class didn't bother Morris, and the two were married in 1859. Her striking looks were to make her a model who famously embodied the pre-Raphaelite art group for the next 30 years. Now, the newlyweds needed a new home, so Morris commissioned his architect friend, Philip Webb, to design and build him a house. The result was Red House, a property that would be medieval in spirit and eventually able to accommodate more than one family. William and Jane moved into Red House in 1860 and, unhappy with what was offered commercially, spent the next 2 years furnishing and decorating the interior with help from members of their artistic circle. This was the beginning of the idea of the craft-based artistic community that he and Burne-Jones had been talking about since they were students. Huge murals and hand-embroidered fabrics decorated the walls, creating the feel of a historic manor house. Deep in Morris's medievalism was his image of a woman as co-workers. The women at Red House had artistic aspirations of their own, and many had their foot in the artist world before they were married. Morris was even pleased that his own wife, Janie, could embroider any design that he made and did not allow her talent to remain idle. But prompted by the success of their efforts, Morris and his friends decided in 1861 to set up their own interiors company, Morris, Marshall, Faulkner and Company, which consisted of William Morris, painters Ford Maddox Brown and Dante Gabriel Rossetti, painter and stained glass artist Edward Burne-Jones, engineer and amateur artist Peter Paul Marshall, and the mathematician / engineer Charles Faulkner. Initially, Morris, Marshall, Faulkner and Company specialized in the kind of wall paintings and embroidery hangings that had been produced at Red House. Everything was to be handcrafted, a principle that set the company firmly against the mainstream focus on industrial progress to elevate handmade objects over mass-produced goods and bring art into the everyday. Its styles became synonymous with the British arts and crafts movement in the late 19th century. Morris was both an avid student of art history and a devotee of the natural world, and his company's works were characterized by design vocabulary drawn from both European and Middle Eastern historical fabric designs, and featured and were often titled after flowers and plants. Now, Red Lion Square was where the firm set up their business, and it had the charm of the erratic. A customer who asked for softer colors once was shown the door by Morris, who said, "There is plenty of mud out there." Now, they set up the showroom. The first floor of the house was at Red Lion Square and was for offices and a showroom. The third floor was workshops. A furnace was built in what was once the kitchen for firing glass for the stained glass windows and firing tiles. At the end of 1861, 5 men and boys were employed. A year later, 12 boys were recruited from the industrial home for destitute boys, and also in recruiting his craftsmen, Morris favored the untutored. Talents were ready to be drawn out of the least likely a person. This was the chief belief of the arts and crafts workshops, and explains the often eclectic mix of members, which consisted of masters of art workers guilds, and then the other side of that coin would be young boys. By 1865, they moved their headquarters and workshops to 26 Queen Square, also in London, and occupied the space for the next 17 years. After leaving Red House, Morris's professional life included a wide range of interest. He became a designer of carpets, tiles, stained glass, wallpapers, fabrics, and furniture. He taught himself to weave tapestries and carpets, and he also was a painter. Morris and his collaborators considered themselves design reformers. They were on a mission to bring beauty back into the lives of the consumer through thoughtful design and production that foregrounded the agency of artisans and anti-industrial techniques. Accordingly, they experimented with dye recipes based on natural materials, revived hand-printed methods for fabrics and wallpapers, and reintroduced hand weaving for woven wool and silk textiles, as well as pictorial tapestries. The firm's first attempt to produce Morris wallpaper at Red Lion Square was using etched zinc plates and transparent oil colors, but that was too laborious and unreliable. So Morris had unconventional wood blocks cut and transferred production to a commercial wallpaper manufacturer, which was Jeffrey and Company. The earliest wallpaper by Morris was designed in 1862. He believed in the purpose of a pattern to impose rhythm, to soothe and civilize, and to have meaning. Morris disliked flowers that were treated geometrically stiffly in patterns. He set his styles against brightly colored formal patterns popularized by the 1850s on. The designs were inspired by English gardens and hedgerows. Now in this first slide here are some of his early designs, and the first is being Trellis, which was from 1862. Now this wallpaper was designed by William Morris, and it was the third to be printed by Morris Marshall Faulkner and Company. The design, which exemplifies Morris's early interest in flat abstract pattern, layered to create a sense of depth, was based on the rose trellises in Morris's garden at Red House. And here you can see an early sketching of the pattern and then some of the colors being colored in, and then we have our final piece of wallpaper. We'll be showing you a video though that shows you how each step is done with each layer and how vibrant the colors can be. Now another example of his wallpapers is the one to the left is Daisy, and it too is based on a daisy hanging at Red House. And then the other one is called Fruit or Pomegranate. His first idea, captured in a drawing around 1862, was from this theme here. After some reworking, production took place in 1864-1865. A repeating pattern of lemons, oranges, pomegranates, fruits, blossoms, peaches, and foliage is printed against a light cream background, and a variant was also produced using a French blue background. Now, although in its early first few years the company did not make much money, but in the late 1860s the firm landed two prestigious decorating commissions that helped establish Morris Marshall Faulkner and Company's reputation to become a well-known for stained glass work. The first was for a dining room at the South Kensington Museum, later the Victorian Albert Museum, and was commissioned in 1865. Morris, Burne-Jones, and Webb created a tranquil, inspired spot for museum patrons to enjoy a cup of tea. Lively muted color scheme and a medieval vibe of the stained glass windows and woodwork showed off the firm's style of interior design. The second commission was at St. James Palace. Initially, they decorated the armory and tapestry rooms in 1866-1867, and later in 1881-1882, they extended the project to decorate all of the staterooms. In 1880, Morris designed the St. James wallpaper, which you see in this slide, especially for the grand staircase at St. James Palace. It was personally approved by Queen Victoria in November of 1880. Despite Morris's reservations about the royal family, being that he was a socialist activist and disliked the Queen, this represented an extremely prestigious commission for Morris and Company, and Morris clearly worked hard on this design, shown through the repeated pencil reworkings. In comparison with some of Morris's more modest domestic designs, this design is monumental in scale, with the large acanthus leaves and flowers arranged against a relatively plain background. Each vertical repeat is 119.4 centimeters, and 68 blocks were needed to create the wallpaper. Following its use in the royal residence, this pattern was also made commercially available through Morris & Company's catalog. He also made this beautiful Damascus wall covering that you see here. And of course, again, there's different variants in the colors that he have. We've got the kind of darker brownish burgundy, and then we have the blue, which he did for some curtains that hung there. But Morris was always trying to create other avenues of his merchandise, tried to get into the clothing line, but at that time, people and other businesses had their prime, vendors that they were using, but that didn't always stop Morris. He actually used this pattern here to design a couple dresses for his wife, which I thought was really kind of interesting. Now, this next slide I'm going to show you is how they actually go about making the wallpaper, and it's still how they do it today. In 1875, Morris bought out his partners and became the sole director of the renamed and restructured Morris & Company. Over the next decade, he continued to design at an impressive rate, adding at least 32 printed fabrics, 23 woven fabrics, and 21 wallpapers, as well as more designs for carpets and rugs, as well as embroidery and tapestry to the company's range of goods. During his lifetime, Morris had created more than 600 designs for textiles, wallpapers, and books. All of these were sold in the shop that Morris opened in Oxford Street in 1877, in a more fashionable space that offered a new kind of all under one roof retail experience. By 1881, Morris had built up enough capital to acquire Merton Abbey Mills, a textile factory in South London. And this allowed him to bring all the company's workshops together in one place and to have a closer control over production. And here you can see in the photo in the bottom corner some of the young men working on the different hand-woven things. And what they did was they sat on their sides of the back so the windows illuminated it so they could see all the different patterns and make sure that it was proper. And same with the dyes, very specific in his dye recipes, and were to a T and completed to be consistent. And here in this next slide, we have the Loudon fabric, which was designed by Morris in 1884. And we have an example of it to the right, but the photograph next to it, you can actually see the gentleman working on it and some of the wallpaper hanging there to dry. Now, Morris began to leave matters of Merton Abbey in charge to his assistant, Henry Darling, and other senior members of the firm, which included his daughter, May. He did, however, continue his interest in tapestry, and for the next 5 years of his life, he was involved with Burne-Jones and Dearly on the design of a set of panels based on the Search of the Holy Grail that was commissioned by the British-Australian businessman William Knox Darcy in 1890 for his dining room. And here you can see some examples of that. Now, towards the end of his career, Morris began to focus increasingly on his writing, and in 1891, he set up Clemscott Press. Books from the press, produced eventually a total of 66, were printed and bound in medieval style, with Morris designing their typeface, initial lettering, and borders. The most famous of these is an illustrated edition of the works of Geoffrey Chaucer, which was published in 1896, a few months before Morris's death. Now, Morris died when he was 62 years old, but a doctor stated that the cause of his death was simply being William Morris and having done more work than most 10 men. Now we're going to take a look at his daughter May and her career. She was born in 1862, and May was actually the younger of William and Jane Morris's two daughters. She once described herself as a remarkable woman, though none of you seem to think so. For many years, her work existed primarily in the shadow of her father's achievements, but as scholars have looked at her life more closely, it is clear that she was a woman who recognized her privileged position in the world and used her advantages, like education, talent, and financial stability, in ways that she hoped would better the lives of women who were less fortunate. At the same time, she spent much of her professional life continuing to design for Morris & Company and promote the welfare of the firm that bore her family name. May was inducted into the world of art and design very early. Alongside her older sister Jenny, May would enjoy a happy yet unconventional childhood in the Morris household. From birth, the girls were immersed in all things arts and crafts. They were surrounded by their father's artistic circle of friends and collaborators, as well as their families. You would find the girls wandering in and out of their father's design workshop and were models for sketches alongside their mother and the Burne-Jones children. May and Jenny also attended a progressive secondary school, Notting Hill High School, that provided an education comparable to boys' school. At home, William Morris amused his daughters with romantic medieval tales and Icelandic sagas, as well as his own poetry and novels. At the same time, the business would intertwine with the family life. May and her sister Jenny would look through the windows of the wide wooden galley where the glass painters worked and watch them shift and bend as they assembled the stained glass. Sometimes Morris would bring his daughters in when he was inspecting the windows. May studied her father's work, and he encouraged her creativity. May's mother aunt taught both girls embroidery, for which May showed early and exceptional promise as an artist as well as a craftsperson. Unlike most Victorian girls, May Morris was not only instructed to replicate given patterns, but she was also encouraged to explore and execute designs of her own, which you can see here is one that a book bag that she and her sister did. By 1878, at the age of 16, May enrolled at the National Art Training School, now known as the Royal College of Art in London, where she studied textiles and embroidery, and most of her focus was on the form of fine, rich needlepoint work that developed in medieval England that was used primarily for church vestments, which you'll see as we continue on and see some of her examples that really showcases. By the early 1880s, May was a full-fledged employee of Morris & Company. She helped produce immaculate handcrafted textiles for the firm. Naturally well-versed in her father's recognizable brand, she carried out her father's vision without neglecting her own creativity. Now, May designed 3 arts and crafts wallpaper patterns as a young employee. Honeysuckle, known for its realistic depiction of the plant, was an especially profitable design for Morris & Company. It was sold in 4 different colorways, as you can see here. When Morris & Company increased its output of embroidery textiles, May Morris became even more involved in the male-dominated design process. She also used her expertise in the history and technique of her craft to teach courses and give lectures. In recognition of her talents and knowledge, May was appointed head of embroidery of Morris & Company in 1885. She was just 23 years old. Her promotion was a testament of her technical expertise, creativity, and business awareness. Morris led the firm's embroidery workshop for over a decade, assuming responsibility for every step of the textile making process. She liaisoned with clients, oversaw textile design and production, priced and invoiced products, and recruited and trained employees. But it was also under May Morris's leadership that Morris & Company marketed an impressive variety of embroidery goods, including wall hangings, cushion covers, tablecloths, and screens, as well as commission pieces and do-it-yourself embroidery kits. In collaboration with her father and colleagues, May made lasting contribution to the firm's distinctive visual brand. Medieval art and objects inspired both May and William Morris to design nature-inspired free-form embroidery patterns that compared to the Victorian era's traditional domestic embroidery favored the paint-by-numbers aesthetic. Free-form embroidery, on the other hand, comprised dynamic, free-hand stitching and emphasized self-expression. This approach had long fallen out of style, and the medieval-minded Morrises were determined to revive it. Over time, these patterns grew increasingly dynamic and complex. When John Henry Daly became head designer in 1880, he and May worked closely together. An example of their partnership is in this slide here, and is known as the Peony panel for a screen that was designed by Daly. And this drawing of it that survives has annotations by May. May continued to immortalize the arts and crafts aesthetic that we now primarily associate with her father. And she also worked to elevate embroidery from a marginalized domestic pastime to a fine art form worth of serious consideration, whether it be decorated in a home or in a museum. And one of her best examples is the Maids of Honor from her career. This dazzling embroidered roundel showcases Morris's artistry and attention to detail. She used a combination of split, long, short, and satin stitches in silk on a delicate gauze background, giving the composition a lifelike sense of movement. Prose by 17th century English poet Robert Herrick borders the central floral design in Gothic lettering. 4 birds, wings outstretched, peer around the roundel from each of the 4 corners. But in 1893, May published a book entitled Decorative Needlework that outlined her philosophy of art and design. She advocated that designers should study nature. She also stood out by using a limited number of stitches. With this natural-inspired subject and simplified forms, the tablecloth in this stitch, vine leaf, exemplifies her recommended approach. While most of the piece you can see is filled with the simple darning stitches, the skill of a professional is revealed in the way the stitch direction is varied, subtly shifting the play of light over the surface. May harshly criticized the economic structure that resulted in low prices for handmade embroidery, prices that reflected neither the aesthetic value of the work nor the value of the labor involved. Machine embroidery had certainly influenced consumers' perception of the cost of such work. William Morris envisioned the arts and crafts movement as a utopian alternative to the social and economic order of the Victorian era. However, when May was emerging as a leading artist in the movement, every existing artists guild in the United Kingdom excluded women from its ranks. In fact, the arts and crafts movement's fundamental Art Workers Guild did not admit women until the 1960s. Her course of action was to support female artists and designers, and so she co-founded the Women's Art Guilds in 1907 to provide the support and networking opportunities that they lacked. In the winter of 1909-1910, she embarked on an American lecture tour about embroidery, but she was also trying to raise funds for projects of Clemscott Manor, the place she called home from 1871 until the time of her death, that would keep the William Morris name alive. Part of her tour included a month-long stop in Chicago and a talk at the city's Gleisner House, which had been furnished by Morris & Company's Fabrics and Wallpapers in the late 1880s. Among the many Morris & Company textiles and wallpapers used in the Gleisner House were the silk parlor door curtains in a pattern called Lotus, a design attributed to May. Like many embroideries from the firm, the fabric was likely sold with the pattern marked on the silk and then stitched in Chicago by the Decorative Art Society. May returned to England from her American lecture tour, even more passionate supporter of the trade unions and professional support of women artists. For her, education and the possibility of varied careers in the arts for women were key components to gender reform in society. Like her father, May was an intelligent, energetic personality, compassionate in her advocacy for good design that was based on knowledge of history, reverence of the natural world, respect for craft, and the union of inspiration and labor. While May Morris never stopped embroidering, she focused the final years of her career on her father's legacy. In a 5-year period, May published 24 comprehensive volumes of William Morris's writings entitled The Collected Works of William Morris. She penned a thoughtful introduction to each volume, preserving invaluable insight into her father's artistic, literary, political, and personal development. After May's death, she bequeathed Clemscott Manor to the University of Oxford, stipulating that it remains in an altered memorial to her father's work. Now, indeed, in a large part thanks to May Morris, that there are so many emblems of the arts and crafts movement that are still known today and well preserved after more than a century.